But we're excited to have amazing presenters, and we'll have some time for Q&A at the end. So I'm super, super excited to introduce our first presenter, Dr. Claridina Soto. Give a round of applause.
Good morning, good morning. So happy to be here. So today I get to share a little bit about some of our policies that, there we go. Good morning. So my name is Claridina Soto. I'm an assistant professor at the University of Southern California, working with many of the tribal communities and urban Indian populations throughout the state of California. I've been in this for probably about 20 years. My mother is from the Navajo Nation and my father is from Jemez Pueblo, but I was born and raised in California, so I'm always learning from our communities and all the great work that we've been able to do. Today I'm going to share about some of the community readiness of our tribal communities in terms of policy, because the state gives out a lot of money through the Department of Health, right? The California Tobacco Control Programs. And we have been raising our voices and advocating that a lot of this funding needs to go back to our tribal communities. We have over 100 federally recognized tribes in the state of California. We have our urban Indian populations. And so we wanted funding to be directly geared towards our communities, because oftentimes our communities don't apply for these funds if it's not specific to our communities, right? So that was this trying to get these RFAs out, these requests for proposals out. The state but wanted to then implement policy only. And it's like, well, let's hear what the community has to say. If they get the funding, what is it that they want to do? Are they ready to just implement policy? What does that mean? So we went to communities to learn a little bit more about their readiness, their interest, and what is it that they really want to do in their communities to reduce commercial smoking and also, preserve our traditional tobacco, sacred tobacco. So as I mentioned, here in California, also Dr. Dan Dickerson shared our populations in California. We're very unique, we're very diverse. I myself, I'm an urban Indian, right? Born and raised in California. I'm not from California tribes, but there's many of us that are diverse, and there's a lot to consider with that. And so again, we have the largest urban Indian populations and just the largest natives here in the state of California as well. The important piece to know here is about tribal sovereignty as well for our communities, right? So tribal sovereignty is being able for these tribal governments to inherit the right to govern their own members, their own tribal lands, establish their own laws. So for example, the state of California has all these state policies, to no smoking in buildings, right? Well, our tribes can mandate their own laws in their own tribal lands. So there's a lot of casinos in California. They can allow smoking. They are on their own tribal land, so they don't have to abide by state law, right? But it does become a little different when it's federal law. So for example, we wanted to assess Tobacco 21, the increasing age of to buy commercial tobacco products. Well, I think Hawaii was first, and then California was second in terms of increasing the age to 21 to purchase before it became a federal law. So at this time, we were collecting this data to see if the tribes were even interested, were they implementing? And actually, many of these communities already were. They did want to increase the age because they knew it would protect the youth from not having access to commercial tobacco products, right? So tribal sovereignty is really important. This also came out when we were talking to many of the tribal communities to be able to understand this, respect this, and know this when it comes to laws within each of the tribal communities. So again, we did receive this funding from the Department of Health, the California Tobacco Control Programs, to assess the level of interest in policy, their readiness to adopt these policies. And to, again, inform RFAs, right, or RFPs, requests for proposals. So there was 5 areas, priorities that we were using key informant interviews and focus groups, going into the communities and talking with them. First was, again, that Tobacco 21, already shared a little bit about that. The second was tobacco tax. Do they want to continue, give tobacco tax, because on tribal lands, many of them don't have to have the tobacco tax sales to folks that come in and purchase commercial tobacco products on tribal lands, right? 3, smoke-free work sites. What kind of policies do they have in place or do they want? As well as smoke-free households. And then the 5th one was the smoke-free indoor-outdoor areas and multi-unit housing. Again, that came from the state, but we found none of our tribal communities that had multi-unit housing, so this didn't quite fit in with that as well. So in order to do all of this throughout the state of California, we of course developed a community advisory board from Northern, Central, and Southern for folks that worked in commercial tobacco and did a lot of advocacy work, working in our own communities. We were able to conduct key informant interviews and hold 8 focus groups with 12 tribes in California. And they had to, the infrastructure of a tribe had to have an Indian health program, clinic, stores that, the tobacco retail stores on their tribal land, a minimum of 100 members, which that's interesting that the state gave us that, right? Because, you know, they thought that some tribes only have 5 members, but I know we have state recognized and federally recognized tribes. But so that was kind of an interesting requirement for that as well. But so we engaged these individual or the tribal groups from Northern, Central, and Southern, and we wanted to get communities together. And there were so many different ways in how that happened in terms of being able to get folks together. It was within their spaces, their locations, where they felt most comfortable. I remember showing up where it took us 2 days to get to this rural community up in Northern California. And we went to the community center, and somebody literally went, okay, they're really here. They went to all the doors and houses, and we had 30 people. I've never had a focus group that big. And I'm holding little babies, and we're talking and, you know, having this conversation. And they really were, one, just happy that we came to their community to listen to them. That is really important. This is the stuff that needs to happen, and the state needs to know of us getting that community perspective and that voice. So I was amazed at how many of them came. And then we had all this food. We literally just went to the store and we just got bread and, you know, deli meat, cheese, fruits, bananas, water, you know, and then they could just make their sandwiches and have chips, and then we all just, you know, were able to have a conversation. Another place, they came to the community center for key informant interviews one by one, and then they were able to go back to town because it was on their way out to go to the restaurant, and then they could just order whatever hot meal they wanted on their way home. So that worked out well. So it's just different ways of, you know, what's going to work best in this community to get their perspective, feed them, of course, and respect their time that they were given to us. So what did we find here, right? So this is a busy slide, but the left, your left side is these California policies that exist, right? So that first one is about the Tobacco 21, right? It passed in 2016. California was the second state to pass it, and so we were wondering if our tribes were doing the same thing. So many of them were. On the day that the state had said, okay, 21 years of age, so you can now purchase instead of 18, our tribes also adopted some of those policies, which we thought was, okay, it's great. You know, we're learning that they are aware and understand these policies that exist, and they too want to abide by some of those because they knew how important it was to not have access. The second one, the Prop 56. So Prop 56 is the tobacco tax dollars, you know, in California that funds the research, funds the tobacco prevention, commercial tobacco prevention, education, et cetera. And so they wanted to see if tribes would also tax, because they don't have to, right, on tribal lands, on their tobacco retail stores. So did they want to tax? They don't want to. Why? Because they didn't want to lose consumers, a lot of the non-natives. If they were to tax, they don't want to tax their native tribal members. So then how do you even do that, to tax non-natives or the visitors and, you know, the natives? So it gets really tricky. But I know that there's other states that have their tribes do tax, and they use those funds as well. So that kind of is the thought process behind that, is would our tribes want to do that, knowing that those tax dollars can help with their programming as well. So they're not quite there yet, at least for the tribes that we had talked to. They'd rather they think that this revenue of them not taxing, more people are coming in and coming to their retail stores to not only purchase tobacco, but the gas stations, or, you know, the other things that are on there, because like the casinos, that's another one. Which is that the next one? Yes, so the next one is, again, the casinos. You know, they have smoking within, and they want to know if they want to create these policies to change that, to have no smoking, you know, casinos. Because I remember being in meetings and they were trying to have the governor mandate that all these tribal casinos, there's about 60 plus now just in California, mandate them to be smoke free. You can't do that. We have our tribal sovereignty. So that's not happening. So this is, again, one of those policies the state wanted to infringe, but we went to go talk to them and they said, no, don't do that, because that's going to also create, you know, disruption in our revenue, disruption in many things. So there's a lot to consider here. when we think about having those tribal policies, especially in the casinos. This is their right to govern. They can make that decision. I don't even have an opinion about it. It's whatever the tribe wants to do, and they want to create that policy or maybe have a larger smoke-free room. Whatever it is that they do, that's up to the tribe to be able to determine those things. It's not for us to tell them otherwise. And that's all we were doing, was listening to their perspective. The next one was to the left side, again, the multi-unit housing. You know, we have this ordinance that's to prevent smoking indoors, but again, this didn't quite, it didn't quite work with the communities that we were with. There was no multi-unit housing. The last one was places in California that banned smoking, right? So smoking, like in, you know, child daycare, schools, clinics, you know, not being able to smoke within a certain distance, right, from the door. So again, in the tribal communities, they had these known policies. Many of them were not written policies in place. They were just known, but you knew not to smoke in these certain areas, in the clinics, especially with inside. The only venues are the casinos, of course, but any other tribal administration office, the clinics, you're not allowed to smoke inside, and you are to keep your distance away from it. And there was a lot of respect for that. If you knew if somebody did smoke, they would stay away, you know, from somebody who was not smoking, or from the kids or the family. So they really respected that and had their own kind of policies in place to that. So we kind of deem this as these big P policies and small p policies. The big P was those more formal written policies. You know, the tribal members really expressed little interest in that. Again, that's like talking about trying to create smoke-free casinos, you know, having these big written policies or enforcement, that really isn't there. And that's okay. These communities were okay with that, right? Small P policies are more of those less restrictive, you know, like banning smoking, and just they expressed this preference for these regulations because, again, there's a lot that's already in place and that's already known and that's already respected in many of these communities. So that was something that was really interesting to see, that difference between these big P and the small P policies. The other piece that came out of this, so there was two things. What's I say critical needs expressed, of course, is funding. The big thing that came out of this when we were talking in these talking circles is, okay, they're like, we have policies, we know this stuff. And I said, well, what do you want? They said, education for our kids. We don't want them using, there's vaping that's coming in big time. They knew that these companies were coming in and trying to get our young ones again to start. So they really wanted that vaping. They wanted these kids to get involved and engaged. So that's a lot of the work that we do in California now, is engaging them in these programs to become advocates and to know and to learn and to teach their other peers and others. And so that's the request that we gave back to the state, is our communities want funding. This new, these, you know, trends and things from vaping, you know, yeah, some of the rates may have gone down for commercial tobacco cigarette use, but vaping is really going up, and there's a lot more attention that's needed to that. And something that's being created by the community, and not just these policies to tell you no, right? Like, okay, that's one part, but there's a lot more that needs to happen with that normative behavior and that stigma and those other things that exist of trying to get the community involved. So that's something that's really important. Cessation programs, again, they want programs, which we have, you know, we're sharing those. Second Wind and Project Sun and other programs that are out there is really important for us to make those available for it. So bottom line was, okay, policies, it's there, but we need to be able to respect tribal sovereignty and to be able to have more funding to help our youth, because those are our future generations. So in conclusion, again, you know, it was just interesting with the Tobacco 21, what we've learned. Our communities are aware of these state laws that happen, and they're on it if they want it. If not, that's okay. They don't have to, because they don't have to abide by state law. But again, federal is a little bit different. Tobacco tax, again, you know, it's just, that's at least what we've learned right now, is they're not ready to tax, you know, their commercial tobacco products that they sell in the retail environment. And again, that's okay. Maybe things will change. Education might change that as well. Big P policy is not very supported, right? And funding, again, very critical to this component. So just lastly, before I end, we have two pieces here. You know, one is a publication, because this is what we do in academia, right? But this is to show the information that was gathered, what it's saying, because this is where the state people need to know and realize what our communities are saying. but we also have our community report here that goes back to the community as well, so they know and see the data that is there. So I have a few more left. I put them on the table yesterday, so I think most of them are gone, but it's just our project work here as well that we all give back to the communities and to the tribes. So with that, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much, Claridina. I was just thinking when she was talking babies, food, tobacco, sovereignty, like you have a whole podcast there, but it's so important. And I think, when you talk about the qualitative, that makes a huge difference. So thank you so much. Another round of applause, please. All right, there's Claridina's contact information. I know that'll be there. Next, we would like to welcome up Ray O'Leary to talk about Juul's targeted exploitation of tribal communities. So welcome, Ray.
Hello again. I didn't really formally introduce myself yet, but I'm Ray O'Leary. I work at Missouri Breaks Industries Research, Inc., which is located on the Cheyenne River Sioux Tribe, where my husband and my children and I all live. I'm an enrolled member of the Turtle Mountain Band of Chippewa in North Dakota, almost all the way up to the Canadian border. And I've had the privilege to work with the Chun-Li Coalition since 2009, as I previously shared. And we had a interesting experience in February 2019 that I'm going to just tell a story of what happened. I want to acknowledge that this is the Cheyenne River Sioux Tribe's story to tell, and I'm very humbled that they've given me permission to kind of be the spokesperson for that story. And here we go. So kind of background, thank you, Claridina, for setting the stage on inherent sovereignty of tribes. I will just gloss over that since you did such a great job on that. American Indian people, as we all know, have one of the highest rates of commercial tobacco use in the United States. And of course, e-cigarettes are a great concern of all communities right now, but especially they should be a great concern for all tribal communities and Native populations as well. And as it's been stated several times throughout the conference, that tobacco is sacred to many Indigenous populations and used for cultural ceremonies, and there is a distinct difference there. So when we look at the tobacco industry documents, many of you are probably aware that the Master Settlement Agreement resulted in exposure of Big Tobacco's internal documents. And there's been some review of this. This particular review was done by Lempert and Glanz. And what they found is that exploitation of tribal sovereignty and traditional use of ceremonial tobacco and poverty was a common theme among Big Tobacco. And this particular paper references also ineffective youth smoking prevention programs that were conducted in the late 90s. One quote that always just stirs me inside that came from the tobacco industry is that they noted that American Indian Alaska Native youth come from broken homes, come from extreme poverty. They lack direction and productive activity with little to do and a sense of hopelessness. So that's the narrative that Big Tobacco is viewing our population through. And the result, as we have all seen, is very high rates of tobacco use. Of course, there's many other causes, but this direct exploitation of a population is a big role, I believe. These youth smoking prevention programs that they pitched then, they used 10 to 14-year-olds who were Native and basically did education with them. But what they found, what came out from their internal documents, is that this education, this anti-tobacco education, resulted in less than 0.5% who understood that smoking is not good for them. 2% understood that smoking causes cancer. 3% understood that you can die from smoking. So it's no surprise that these, youth smoking prevention campaigns actually had most likely the opposite effect as they were portrayed to be intended for. And of course, then there's charitable contributions and sponsorships. It's not been that long ago that at every tribal rodeo or powwow that there was booths with free chew or cigarettes or vapes even. At one point, we went into our school's third grade class to educate on vape. And this was, I don't know how many years ago, I've been at it too long, but a long time ago when they used to look like fake cigarettes. So we were talking about vaping, and class after class after class of third graders came in and said, "Oh, we saw those at the Labor Day powwow. I got one of those from my auntie or from my cousin," or they were being given out. And there was no table, there's no display that anybody could reference, but they were being passed out at our Labor Day fair and rodeo and powwow. And then, of course, there's building alliances with tribal leaders to help improve their corporate image, and point of sale tactics, which I talked a little bit about before, which is like the price reductions and promotional strategies, coupons and giveaways, and of course, the Native American imagery and names. So what happened in February of 2019, 3 representatives from Juul, which at the time was the largest e-cigarette company in the nation, approached our tribal council with a switching program, is what they called it. And their mission was to partner with tribes to improve lives. What they proposed is to give the tribe, the tribal healthcare system, not just the tribe, but the healthcare system, starter kits, which would be basically like the Juul pod, or I'm sorry, the cartridge, the charging unit, and I think 4 or 5 pods that comes with the starter kit. Normally those retail at about $50, and they were going to sell them to the tribe for $5, so a 90% reduction in the price. And then they proposed that our healthcare professionals, our doctors and PAs and nurse practitioners, then basically prescribe them Juul through this online portal that they could go sign up for and enter all kinds of personal data about their tobacco use history, about their education and their income, and how often they use and how their Juul experience is, so they can customize it for them and make it better for them. And it became very clear to me that this was not a good thing. But because they made some false claims that their product can be used for smoking cessation, and that their product was 90% safer than combustible tobacco, our tribal council representatives were quite interested in this prospect of this new product that they hadn't been, heard of before, and the opportunity to get it at this great price, and these big dollar figures that they were going to invest up to $600,000 in the tribe and hire a local person to implement this switching program. They were intrigued by the prospect, but thankfully they then said that we need more information on this. We want something in writing. So what happened is the council went into executive session. They discussed this idea for a bit. Of course, that's executive, so we were asked to leave the room. But I had the opportunity then to visit with these Juul representatives in the hallway and ask, they had proposed themselves as public health professionals. One of them actually had formerly worked for the CDC. And I said, okay, so if you're a public health professional, let's think about the optics of this and how this is going to impact the community that I know and love. We're switching, one harmful product for another harmful product that we don't know very much about, because this was still in 2019, and even still in 2022, we're still learning about this product. And the representatives insisted that this was a public health approach and harm reduction, and they claimed all the things. And ultimately, we were invited back in, and then the council moved to table the issue, and they asked for something in writing with the full details of what this switching program included. They moved on with their meeting, and our tribal attorney then reached out a few months later and said, hey, I got this email from this Juul company, and they're requesting us to sign a non-disclosure agreement in order to provide the written documentation of the program that you requested, and that they said that the health committee had already approved the non-disclosure agreement to be signed, which is not true. So thankfully, we have some great leaders in our tribal community, and there was good communication, and the right people got the right messages, and they said, no, this is not good, and we never heard from Juul again after that point. So that's kind of the story of what happened. And I think, I mean, there's so many examples here that I'll get into of kind of a replication of this playbook, if you will, of big tobacco. So we talked about, previously what we'd learned from the master settlement documents in the past, but we recall, so giveaways, I mean, of course, they're going to sell them to us at a 9% reduced rate, but they might as well have given them away at that point. Offering money with this switching program, the false claims about e-cigarettes being used for cessation and harm reduction approach, hiring tribal members, youth smoking prevention programs, and approaching national organizations as well as the Shan Sioux Tribe and others. They also reached out to the National Congress of American Indians and the National Indian Health Board as well, had contacts, and they had requested to set up booths at conferences and sponsor events and things like that. So it's very pervasive, the attempts that this company used to embed American Indian people and try to get us as a population hooked on their product. So the result of that then is I got a call from somebody in Congress and I was terrified. I'm like, what do they want from us? And what does this mean? And thank goodness I have a friend at Public Health Law Center that kind of held my hand through the process and encouraged me to speak out. The Tribal Council was very supportive of me speaking out and sharing this story as well, to protect other tribes, not to expose anybody, but to let other tribal communities know that this is happening, that there's things that they can do to prevent it, and to kind of what to watch for, what to do and what not to do. The result of that hearing that I had the opportunity to testify in Washington, D.C. in July of 2019, of course, there was a bigger story to be told, I should say. The overall theme of the hearing was the youth e-cigarette epidemic. This was one piece that I'm very thankful that the organizers of this hearing acknowledged as a player in that discussion and invited us to. But if you're interested in watching some clips from that, there's a YouTube link there that you can jot down. But the outcome of this hearing was that there was a warning letter issued to the FDA, which ordered Juul to cease tribal engagement and outreach and requested for more information on the switching program. The response that Juul provided is they declared that their switching program has been abandoned, and no tribes accepted the program, like yay tribes. They admitted to targeting at least 8 sovereign tribal nations. But what's interesting is they also said that they contacted an undisclosed additional amount of tribes that they never were invited basically to present in any formal way, so they didn't claim them. They got to the stage of 8 tribal councils, but there was who knows how many others that said no thank you before they even got to that point. And I guess the result is that none of these tribes, I mean, I really feel like this is a victory in sovereignty and public health and tobacco control and prevention, because despite this really, I don't even know what you call it, pervasive attempt to, infiltrate these tribal communities, 8 who got a little bit more information than others. None of them took the deal. They have now, you can see that their market share and their profit of their Juul product has gone down significantly since this hearing. And we haven't heard from them since, so we're happy about that. So it's overall a victory. I also just want to acknowledge quickly, because this session is on marketing, there are other tobacco companies that we need to be watching out for. So I see a lot of eyebrows raised here, and that's the intent of this. It was brought to my attention that there's a company called Chief of Vapes, I think it was about a year ago. And the reason that this was alerted is some partners at Stanford University found that this website was selling to people under the age of 21, that they basically, you can see that center image there just says, are you over 18 years old? And then it says either let me in or go back. So they have to just click let me in. And then they have to enter their driver's license information, and they can order this Chief of Vapes products from the UK into the US, all they have to have is a driver's license that indicates that they're older than 18. And of course, we all know they can just go pull that from their parents' wallet if they want. So that was the reason that this company was identified. And in the process, I'm thankful that those that identified it also recognize that there's some really ugly things happening here to exploit and misappropriate a population for their own benefit. On their website, they quote, they say, by taking themes of love, nature, and serenity perpetuated in Native Indian culture and mixing them with our love for vaping, we have had nothing but a great response so far. So this is right here, misappropriation. They are taking an image, a culture, person, a group, a population, and using that image for their own gain. And you can see how many of us identify with these images. It's sexualized, they use cartoons. This is not who we are, right? So I've reported them to the FDA. They really can't do it. Thank you. Please join me if you like that. Please join me. I mean, the more reports, the better. Really, the FDA can't do much about this misappropriation, but they can do something about the age restriction. But I think in the process of reporting that violation and the age restriction, it's important to also acknowledge that there's some awful marketing happening as well. If you're interested in this, check out their social media pages. There's lots more to be seen. When we discovered this about a year ago, they had several videos that were very offensive that have now been taken down. I'm not really sure what the motive was for that, but at this point, all I'm seeing is a lot of just photos and promotion. So what do we do about it? Again, FDA reports are great, but enacting policies to prevent targeting. The Public Health Law Center table has some great documents on addressing tobacco industry targeting of tribes, and in that there is a resource, I believe, to a model policy that tribes can pass that will prevent them from being targeted or entering any deals with tobacco companies. Implement point of sale policies, like I talked about on Cheyenne River. We're currently working to restrict the sale of any products that misrepresent us as a people. Report illegal or unethical marketing practices to targeting Native people. So again, all those that applauded now, that's your cue to get this link, go search it out, and also submit a report of a violation to the FDA. And be alert for others. I mean, who knows what else is out there until somebody sees it and reports it and shares it. Let's work together on this to identify these companies and get them reported. Advocate for funding towards e-cigarette research and education. Obviously, there's so much more to be learned. I think when it comes to research, it's important for all populations to be at the table and part of that research, so we know how this is affecting our population specifically. And of course, education. And I love some of the comments Claridina made about not just writing an RFA for the things that serve you as an organization, but writing an RFA or grant opportunities for what truly serves the tribes and the people that are on the ground who know that community and the needs of that community, so they have more flexibility and freedom to use those funding opportunities in the way that their community needs. And then, of course, considering litigation against industry malfeasance. I think more to come on that, we'll see. And insisting on respectful, equitable, and transparent partnerships. I mean, I think this goes across the board, right? This isn't just in partnerships that we enter with any cigarette company or any other. This should be the bare minimum standard anytime we're entering into partnerships to not just expect it, but insist on it. If partners aren't giving us respect, equity, and transparency, move along. There's somebody else that will. So with that, my contact information, also there's a YouTube link at the bottom if you're interested in hearing more about the Chun-Li Coalition story that highlights some of our work with the Juul experience. There's a link there. So thank you for your time.
All right, so when Ray said they're counting victory, they're counting coup because they stood their ground against the tobacco industry, who's a billion dollar industry. So big, huge round of applause. All right, so man, that's hard to follow. Two amazing presenters, but really tying in with this tobacco industry misappropriation of American Indian culture and traditional tobacco. I'm Coco Vilus. My traditional name is Zinus Hakamaki. I'm the health equity manager for the American Indian Cancer Foundation. ACAF staff, what up? Woo woo! I see y'all in the room. I'm enrolled in the Mandan Hidatsa Rikara Nation. I'm Hidatsa and Assiniboine. I represent two tribal nations in Montana, Fort Peck and Fort Belknap. And then my dad is from across the ocean in Guam. So I always tease, this is what you get when that happens, when two people meet in the military from across the world. But I'm really happy to be here with you all today. I just want to also just acknowledge the ancestral Dakota homelands that we are on in this beautiful space with all of the beautiful people. And we encourage, if you guys want to find out the lands that you're from, to text 1-907-312-5085. And I use a lot of pictures of my kiddos because, free copyright. No, but, I just think we learn so much through our children. And, when we think about when we do this work, and Ray, you talked about, we've talked about traditional tobacco. I don't think you can ever say it enough in acknowledging it for our young people. So just want to shout that out. Acknowledgements. I want to highlight Dr. Joanne De Silva and Dr. Erin O'Gara, who worked with me on this project. Super excited. Let me tell you, we researched tens and thousands of documents in the tobacco industry document library. When we first started out, we went to the UCSF research program to learn how to do the document search. When you have to hit quotation mark, it felt like being back in school. And so we did this project together, and we're going to highlight some of those results. So this is my official agenda. We'll just kind of go through that. But when we think about health, what is health? The World Health Organization talks about a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. But I'm just really putting this up there because it's not the definition of being sick. It's more to that. And then I think of us as American Indian communities. We want to live in balance and harmony, and it comes from the holistic, mental, spiritual, physical components. And so when I think about health, I think about, all that we bring with us. How many of you guys have seen this image? So it's talking about equality, equity, reality. But I'm like, why are we standing outside the fence? Let's bum rush this fence, knock it down. Why are we come on? So I'm proposing a new model and being in the circle, because that's where we are. We are a very circular community. So I'm challenging whoever did this to just take it a step further. So when we think about, social determinants of health, they're all things in our environment that impact our health, from, employment, transportation, safety. And so these are the circumstances that we're born into and really affect a lot of, our mortality, the disease and death and disease rates. And so we just always want to highlight, it's not like one size fits all. It's not, because they're just using commercial tobacco products. There's a lot of other underlying factors that impact that. And so when we think about how do these contribute to health, we're looking at things that are within our control. But if you look, so there's social economic factors, and these are really determined by the environment. The reason that we see so many of these is because our ability to engage in healthy behaviors. So for example, I come from Fort Peck. It takes me 2 hours to go to a Walmart, 5 hours to go to a mall. By the time I get, a great apple, a crisp apple, it's not so crisp, and that's a reality. And so there's just we have to acknowledge a lot of those factors. Next, just the commercial tobacco's impact. We're here, we're talking about it, and sometimes, people are like, we know it's bad, but again, I can't emphasize that enough. You guys probably know these facts and figures, so I'm not going to repeat them to you, but I just want to say that there's, in the U.S. economy, that there's over $300 billion annually in healthcare costs, but I feel like that's rising more and more. And now we know that in overall the country, that in the U.S. we have seen commercial tobacco rates use decrease. However, in these communities that are listed on the screen, that's not been the case. They've actually increased, if not, and stayed the same. And these are the communities that are heavily targeted by the tobacco industry. So next, we wanted to really talk about some of the tobacco industry. And when we started our research, it was really important. We would see all of the other communities, the advertisements, and then a lot of the times we see like the natural American spirit. And so we wanted to kind of do a deeper dive to that. But when we were doing some of our initial research, we found that the tobacco industry, their partnerships, they have mass media advertising. And one of the projects was called Project Scum. So like Ray was talking about, hopelessness, broken homes. This is what they were calling this, which is subculture urban marketing. And their focus was on the LGBTQ and homeless populations. They distributed logo-covered blankets to homeless shelters. And they also funded HIV/AIDS research programs for individuals with AIDS, different pride activities, as well as programs for mentally ill and homeless populations. So they're also contributing to, just other underlying causes, which is pretty disgusting in my opinion. And then this is also another example of the tobacco industry marketing to African American communities. As you can see, the images on the left, those are from decades ago, and the images on the right are more recent. However, the marketing still remains the same. They target our communities by providing coupons and decreased pricing in low income communities. And now with the media, they're getting really savvy with like the different types of mobile coupons. So it's just something that they're a tricky tobacco industry. They're sneaky, and they have the money and the creative to talk about it. And I have to share a story. Lori and I were at the Spit Tobacco Summit. Gosh, I don't know how long ago. And at that point, she was talking about like the tobacco industry executives had to stand up and identify if they were from the tobacco industry. And one young man stood up and all eyes were on him. And like that's got to feel like pretty scary. But like we have to acknowledge too, they're human beings. And I think all of our message too is like to get this message across, to respect the original intention, and to honor this work of what we're trying to do, and hopefully change their hearts and minds. But they are tricky, so we got to stay on our toes. And then in Minnesota, we're in Minnesota, so we just want to highlight that back in 2017, St. Paul restricted the sale of menthol tobacco products that weren't allowed in convenience stores, only into tobacco shops and liquor stores. But I'm not sure if that's changed. I haven't seen the updated numbers. Yes, Cassandra, talk to Cassandra. And then next, we're going to just kind of dive into American Indian tobacco history and context. I always like to acknowledge our ancestors that have come before us because, like Lori said yesterday, we're a miracle that we're sitting here. Because the motto of the U.S. government was to kill the Indian, save the man. And, I always like to, we're doing this for our children, and these are my two little ones that are offering the tobacco. When I was talking about this logo, just actually a couple of months ago, my cousin, who's like our family historian, she just found one of my great-great-grandfather's graves at Carlisle boarding school. And so I've like really been reflecting on this picture because I've been sharing this, I always share this because I acknowledge that, a lot of these babies never made it home. And then it's just like, we talk about trauma being historic, but it's still current. We're still facing a lot of these inequities in our communities. And so that's why we continue to do this work. And then this image on the left, the top, this is from 1952. I'm not going to call out anybody. I'm not trying to age anybody. But this image is from a mission school in South Dakota, and they were selling our babies for $10. $10. And they were saying, in this letter, it's too small to read, but basically what it was saying is like, we know you're good people. You can have your choice of a boy or girl. Just thank you. But like 1952, y'all, that is not that long ago. We talk about the mascot issue. This image on the right was from a Minnesota newspaper for a governor race. And at the bottom of that, it says the state reward for dead Indians has been increased to $200 for every redskin sent to purgatory. This sum is more than the dead bodies of all the Indians east of the Red River are worth. So like that was in a local newspaper under government. And then, acknowledging where we are on the Dakota ancestral homelands, the hanging of the Dakota 38. And, it's 7 days later after that happened, the Emancipation Proclamation was signed, but we don't hear about these. And so we always want to honor these ancestors when we do our work. So when we think about what disrupted the Indian world, right? Loss of language. So when I was having you guys say good morning, like to us, that's a coup. Loss of land. When you're hearing about, people doing these ancestral land acknowledgements, that's a coup. You think about food. Y'all go to Awamni if you can while you're here. There's so many great indigenous chefs right in this area. Go and just revitalize and be in that part of that reclamation of bringing our world, because somebody said asleep. Kat, you said asleep. The languages are asleep. A lot of these pieces were asleep, but guess what? We're here, we're standing, we're not going away no matter what. And then really when we do this work, the two tobacco ways, we make the distinction between traditional tobacco and commercial tobacco. And I acknowledge Lori and the Blackfeet Nation Tobacco Coalition of making that distinction where we honor traditional tobacco. It's very specific. We're not just throwing our traditional tobacco. It's held in deep regard versus commercial tobacco that we all know causes death, disease, sickness. Like we know that, and many of us have been impacted by that. And then look, it's so pretty, right? Like look at that vibrant green plant. Look at the red willow. Like that's alive. It's a sacred being, and that's what we're working towards. Now, how many of y'all have seen this person? Right? We're not going to sing the colors of the wind, but I want to acknowledge the real human. I forgive me if I'm saying her name wrong, but Matoaka, we think about, again, missing Indigenous women. You think about trafficking. You think about all that. And as part of her condition of release, she was to marry John Rolfe. And John Rolfe is known as one of the people to pioneer the commercial tobacco industry. So again, I think my theme word throughout this presentation is acknowledgement of what people did to get here. So now I'm going to jump into our research. Like I said, we went to the Tobacco Industry Document Library. We were getting all of those buzzwords and wanting to figure out what they said about American Indian communities, because we just didn't see that type of research. So as far as we know, this was the first research of its kind to look at American Indian exploitation and misappropriation. And while we were looking through the documents, we were kind of like not finding things. When we would type in Indian, it would bring up a lot of documents from, the country of India. So we were like Native Americans, indigenous, all of these different terms. And then, so we did a lot of searching, we did a lot of refining, we did a lot of analyzing. And then we used both the documents, the Truth Tobacco Document Library, as well as Trinkets and Trash. And then we weren't finding what we were trying to search for. So they were like, let's type in some stereotypical, words, which I will not repeat. And then stuff started popping up and we had to go. And let me tell you, this project was a labor of love. We had to take a lot of stops because we were getting pretty angry and frustrated of like what the tobacco industry was not only saying about our community, but multiple other communities. And so this took a couple years to just even process. I think we were going sideways, just trying to research all of those pieces. And like what I said, it's like sometimes we would search up to 500 documents a day if we can, just like through all of the buzzwords. My fun little graphic. So the key themes, what we found in our research was we broke it down into 3 buckets: cultural symbols and imagery, cultural and historical significance, and emphasizing tobacco as natural. And so just kind of building upon what Ray's presentation with the natural American spirit, you see this image, they're using the pipe, they're using the headdress, they're using these beautiful colors. And back in 1995, a Philip Morris executive said that American Indian imagery served to bond people with Americans' origins. So they're utilizing those romanticized versions. The Santa Fe Natural Tobacco Company said that one of their customers, this was their testimony: your cigarettes with the Indian volcano image on the pack and the small golden thunderbird on each cigarette help him to use his smoke breaks as a kind of a personal communion, so to speak. And when we were digging through those library documents, there were so many testimonies of people's, insight of what they felt when they smoked these tobaccos. So I was always wondering, like, tobacco is so sacred to us. Like, were they getting that experience? Was the tobacco so powerful through all of these commercialized that they were experiencing it? But for the tobacco industry to exploit that messaging in that way is still, again, disgusting. Another is from the American Tobacco Company back in 1980. They said the first Americans to smoke were Indians. It's time they took back credit for inventing the cigarette and got back the country the cowboys took away. First of all, we're still here. I'm just saying. They didn't take nothing. I'm just kidding. And then on the image on the right, you see just like hand drawings of what they wanted to use tobacco pouches. And then it says the cigarette more American than the cowboy. And then the image on the left is actually a product order form for the Natural American Spirit, where you can order sage smudge sticks, you can order the Book of Elders, you can order some ceremonial incense, with your pack of commercial tobacco products. So, just strong examples of the tobacco industry's trickiness. Robin Summers, who was the former CEO back in the 1980s, 1990s, when the co-ops and the organic foods were making this comeback, people were getting into that natural vibe, which is a good vibe. Don't get me wrong, I'm all about that. But they were just more invested in what they were putting into their bodies. And the CEO said the initial thought had nothing to do with American Indian use of tobacco in its natural state. Thought had to do with that, honoring tradition, the respectful nature surrounding the American Indian use of tobacco. Inherent in that concept was tobacco without additives. And they have a whole tobacco policy statement for the Natural American or Santa Fe Tobacco Company that says they collaborated with American Indian community members and, really pushing these statements forward. However, they don't list that. So again, I'm not sure if that's real or not. So thinking about, hearing all of the presentations throughout the conference, thinking about, the traditional tobacco, let me say my heart is so filled from all those young people. I mean, the words, their songs, the music, and the drum beat, and thinking about, like, there's so much that's happened to our tobacco, but then listening and reflecting, there's so much good. It's still carrying, that spirit alive within it. And so, tying that, a lot of the commercial tobacco use has been profound in our communities. The tobacco industry continues and will continue until, one of the elders, I'm not going to say who, said we should just go blow up the tobacco companies, but, we're not going to get that radical. But the marketing and exploitation is still very alive, and we need to continue doing the communities and with Claridina and all of the sovereignty and continuing to just help that. And then thinking about in all of our communities, it's very complex and what that looks like. Not every tribe uses tobacco in the same way, and that's okay. Everybody has their own way. And so when we were talking about, we use this presentation a lot with the research students. A lot of our work that we have done was writing and publishing articles, but writing it from our view, writing it with our original stories and teachings. And let me tell you, that's hard to write a peer-reviewed article in those formats, but we did it, and it was really important. So we can share copies of our research. But it's like placing equity at the center of public health. I know equity is that buzzword. What does that mean, right? We all want to do better. We all want to be healthy. Supporting community-led and culturally based health partnerships and initiatives. Like, we know what we've got going on. We know how to do this work. I mean, if you look at all the fun swag, I'm looking at Chris Johnson, that resonates within our communities, right? Earlier, Ray, you're talking about just like the posters and the prizes, that resonates with communities. Back in our communities, we used a lot of hip hop, rodeos, it's whatever where the community wants. Hold external influences like the tobacco industry accountable, call them out, it's okay. We're on social media. I mean, I wish we could do a TikTok video in here, but I'm not that savvy. So if any of you guys are, we should do it. And that goes to you virtual Zoom participants too. Get on your phones. Thinking about health in all policies approach. But for us, I think it's culture in all policies, making sure that we have all of those strategies and teachings in there and becoming advocates. Obviously, we're all here. We're all advocates. So I don't have to tell you guys. This is a lot of the slide that we share with students who are working within our tribal communities and wanting to become better allies and partners. So with that, I just say thank you. This is my daughter. She's not this little anymore. She's 13 now. But this is one of our proudest campaigns and focusing on that. We're going to flip that script. We're going to show them what real Native people look like in valuing our tradition and sacred medicine. So with that, I'm going to close my session, and then I'm going to bring up Ray and Claridina up for any potential questions. Any questions? Yes, Cassandra.
Question for Ray. During your experiences battling against the virtual industry representatives, do you receive any backlash? We've heard a lot of horror stories from previous folks where they're trying to challenge the tobacco industry in various ways. Just wondering if you experienced.
Yeah, I was very concerned about that. I had talked to, a physician, a pediatric physician that testified in a federal racketeering case and had just terrible stories to share. So I was very concerned, but I felt like ultimately, you know, I stuck to the facts. I was able to back up everything that that I shared. It was they left maybe too much of a paper trail to dispute anything that was shared. So I didn't. I haven't yet, and it's been several years, so I feel pretty good about escaping any, you know, backlash that may have come.
I really appreciate your bravery in sharing this story of how much impact that had on communities without just speaking out that.
Thank you.
I was just gonna say, all presentations were great. Great, I was wondering if this is coming from like not even very pessimistic place, but once you report to the FDA, you say this is a problem, they're disappropriating, what do they actually do? You talked about it a little bit.
Yeah.
It seems like nothing.
Right. I mean, I think power in numbers, right? Like one report versus everyone in the room, you know, they might pay attention to that, but they do an investigation to my knowledge. There is a number that you can follow up with. And when you submit a report through that webpage that I shared, you get an email communication with like a case number, and you can call and follow up. But without that call to follow up, they don't ever respond back to you and say, oh, here is the result of this. For a while was calling monthly. I've kind of lost my motivation because nothing's happened from it yet. But I mean, I think it's still important just to be on their radar, even if nothing major has happened to this point. They can't say that they didn't know if the report's been filed, right? So, and definitely if power in numbers, if there's multiple reports coming in for the same companies, maybe that will be enough to take some action.
Thank you, I appreciate that. I was just thinking, I don't think that's in the tribal or in the tobacco work that most of us do. Like, it seems like that could be distributed out, like, hey, go put in a report, go put in a comment.
Absolutely.
My question's for Dr. Soto. I'm very curious. Oh, now I'm nervous because I have a mic. No. I'm really curious about the dissemination of that report back to the state of California and what their response was and how they've reacted, because I think I work for the Minnesota Department of Health, and we did a very similar input process with our tribal nations here in Minnesota, and we don't have 100 and some, so we only have the 11, and so we were able to do non-competitive grants. But I'm curious what their reaction has been and how they're moving the grants program forward.
Yes, thank you for asking that, because I realized I didn't share that in my presentation. And so the funding did go out, and it started with the tribal communities. So the urban Indian populations could not apply for that funding yet, but they did still make it kind of policy based. But we shared back our findings and where the focus should really be with some of the funding. So it's still tricky because the application process is a headache. The systems in place are not user-friendly. I can't even figure them out. So that's just another challenge in itself for our communities finally wanting to apply, because one, it's geared towards them. It's for them to do their work in their communities, but just to apply for it is a really big issue. So that's another, I guess, fight we have, you know, for them. But regardless, there's, I want to say 5 tribes that are funded out of the 100 plus. They have a coordinating center as well that's supposed to be supporting the tribes. It is a non-native tribal entity, unfortunately. That's a whole nother issue. Now the urban Indian communities can also apply. They had a funding mechanism, an RFP that went out for them as well. So there, I think, is 1 or 2 of them that are also funded as well. So they are getting funded. You know, that money is out there, but there's a lot of the hiccups that I think still need to take place as well. And the review committee within. They don't have any Native folks within that understand. Yeah. Yep, because you could very well have a community that can do the work if you give them the money, but they don't have that grant writer to write a great proposal for them to get the money, right? Yeah. Thank you.
well, I was just going to clarify that they had a change in leadership at the coordinating center, and that is a Native person that is the director of that now. So, not to, I think all those other things.
Who is that?
Well, yeah, I just changed again. It was Ravina Soto before, and then she just emailed us and said there was another change. But all those other things are still incredibly true, but I think at least maybe they started listening a little bit about who should be running the coordinating center. And that was also our thoughts and feedback on that.
Well, I want to thank all of you ladies. Those were excellent presentations. I've been doing tobacco prevention now for 30 years, and it's just so nice to be here and hear this being revitalized. I'm a California Indian, so thank you, Claridine, for, I think my tribe participated, and if they haven't, we'll get them in. And then the tobacco industry stuff, I went through that workshop, and I know the frustration. So my success was that I actually found my own name and project in those papers. So it's like, yay, I made it. I'm tobacco prevention. I really, really did. And then with the Juul, I wanted, Ray and I have had this conversation, but they approached multiple tribes in the Northwest. Our tribal leaders, they showed up at affiliated tribes of the Northwest and came to our health committee. And we have sophisticated tribal leaders who kicked them out. So I'm really proud of our tribal leaders who were able to just say, no, you guys need to really get out of here. But Juul, the tobacco industry, people who know me and have heard me talk a little bit, they're the devil, they are Satan. They also showed up at we did an online, this was pre-pandemic, but we still did a Zoom training for nicotine replacement therapy with our tribes. And people had to call in, and there was a name on there that I didn't recognize. So I did a little chat like, hey, I don't recognize you. What tribe are you with? What clinic? And he goes, oh, I work for Juul. And I was like, what? So he went through this whole process. He called one of our tribal leaders, misrepresenting himself, saying, I saw this training and I'm really interested and I can't get any information on it. My tribal leader didn't know any better, but we had to disconnect him from our training. And there was nothing on there for him to learn. It was nicotine replacement, but that's how undermining they are and how wicked they are, and they really want to know what's happening in Indian country. So thank you again, ladies. Excellent presentations.
And I just have to say thank you for speaking up and sharing that piece of your story. I mean, I think that over time we'll learn that more tribes have similar stories.
How to find an Indian, 500nations.com. So if there is an Indian occupying a chair in a state government office that's supposed to work with tribes, that's really up to us. That's our responsibility to find out that who is that Indian that this lady spoke about, or this person spoke about. But I also want to say the FDA, the reason they kind of came in as mid-tobacco, right? And after there had been generations of work done already. And they're a regulatory agency, they're consumer sensitive. So that's why the industry also has influence. But early, way back in the day, there was always a call to action at every conference. So you heard a call to action from Ray O'Leary. Use your intelligence, log in. You're a consumer. Your children are consumers. Your grandbabies are going to be consumers. And this is not a one generation shot turnaround. But the other thing is that if there's somebody here from FDA, if they're not here at this conference, then they should be here next year, whatever it needs, right? But I also say that what's next in tobacco? From these presentations, you received golden jewels of recommendations of what's next. All of these ladies, their collective intelligence, and if those documents don't light you up, then you need like a ginger shot or something, I don't know. You know, you need that caffeine water that they're peddling now. You know, you need something. So what I'm saying is that the FDA was not in the original best practices because it was through strong advocacy from the community level. We win at community because we're the ones protecting communities' futures, culture's futures. So when you go to the national level, you got to buy a suit sometimes, but Ray, bust out the ribbon skirt, set and herring. We have a Native woman in leadership right now and head of the Indian boarding school initiative. So we want our tobacco back. We want things back, but that involves moccasin work, footwork, stiletto work. Oh, to our runner here. And, you know, so the FDA is not undoable. And in their scientific advisory committee, there's always a public input portion. So for new products, and at their initial, they had a tribal desk in FDA. So I don't know what happened in filling that during the last administration or this one. So time to check current facts, right? And there's a way you can put in comments for future product use. And yes, they're sly, but guess what? That's my culture, to go out and find things and find out things about you. And we're studied a lot, but we study too. So I just want to say some of the reasons, yeah, they're big and scary and all that kind of stuff, but you know, I don't plan to go anywhere. I don't plan to be the last person in my culture. I don't plan to give up my homeland ever. And so when you're on Indian land, guess what? You got to engage with Indians. That's just how it rolls out throughout this territory in the hemisphere. But I want to give kudos to all those ladies and Dr. Soto. You know, I just have mad love and respect for you. Coco, you know, like power on me and Coco. You know, we won't rap, but you know, we had whatever we had to do. We had to not only kick down fences, but doors. Just get fired up. Oh my God, who wants to live? Right? It's about being alive. But I just want to give, these were like, I feel like, you know, maybe like I was in, you know, I don't know, some wonderland and somebody dropped a treasure chest in my lap. So I want to give mad appreciation to all of you. And I'm looking forward to what's next. 100 ribbon skirts at the next hearing that Ray O'Leary appears at, you know. So I just love everybody in this room and your efforts. And I just want to say, you know, have wherever you go after this, you know, carry that zeal because we're worth it. Are we worthy? Yes. Are we worth it? Are our families and communities? That's the zeal that has got tobacco control in an Indian country, any country, communities across the US. That's what has got us to these changes. It's our love for our people. It's simple. And I'm sorry, you know, the tobacco industry is a little over 500 years old or so, the mistakes they've made, but we're older. So our knowledge base has a lot of issues to share, but also more wisdom about how you survive, build on resiliency and move forward. And I like to hashtag things in a positive, productive, proactive way. Thank you, ladies.
All right. Well, thank you all so much for your time and your energy. And now, you know, a very important thing is happening next, lunchtime. So enjoy your lunch and we will see you back at the next session. Have a great day.